Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, Series 2000. This week, I'm excited to visit Full Moon Fever. I'm always here for a werewolf story, so I was happy to see Full Moon Fever was up next. It's probably the weakest of the werewolf stories so far for me. It wastes no time getting to the meat of the story, and we have beast children running around for almost the entirety of this book. However, it becomes pretty apparent there wasn't much of a plot in mind for this one. It's just an endless sequence of running from one place to the next. It also had a really obvious twist that made a lot of the book feel kind of pointless while reading. I still think it's worth checking out if you haven't read it yet though. This 1999 cover is fine. I almost like the giant moon in the background more than the beast creature itself. Also, this beast is pretty jacked for being a supposed 12-year-old. Our front tag says, Harry Halloween, which is a play on Happy Halloween, because I forgot to mention this is a Goosebumps Halloween story, but let's check out the back of this book. The blanket, the sheets, they were shredded. Clawed to bits. Grunting, my chest heaving up and down, raspy breaths escaping from my open mouth, I staggered across the bedroom to my mirror and stared at even more horror. Tufts of short black fur grew from the back of my neck, monstrous and ugly. Okay, let's start this summary. The book opens with an introduction to Robbie and his younger sister Alicia, and they're both busy tormenting the family dog Scruffy. Apparently, howling freaks Scruffy out, so both kids are entertaining themselves in the living room by howling aggressively at the dog until their mom makes them stop. We're then introduced to the catalyst of this story. These kids are being sent off to visit their creepy Grandpa John, who loves telling them terrifying stories. We learn it's getting closer to Halloween, so we have another Goosebumps Halloween book on our hands, which is always fun. Grandpa John lives in a little cottage deep in the woods, which is ideal for a werewolf encounter. The kids can never sleep while visiting due to the frequent strange animal howls surrounding the cottage. We then have some more scenes with Scruffy, and then by the next chapter we're off to Grandpa John's and he greets the kids with, Welcome to my home, said the spider to the fly. We learn this cottage is infested with critters. Little mice are running around everywhere, and a raccoon even shredded Grandpa John's last chair. The parents leave, and Grandpa John pops a big bowl of popcorn so they can all settle in by the fire for some scary stories. There's an alarming howl right outside the window, and Grandpa John seizes the opportunity to talk about Full Moon Fever. It just occurred to me that we've already had a werewolf fever story, arguably the most popular werewolf Goosebumps story, the Werewolf of Fever Swamp, but that was swamp fever running rampant in that one, not full moon fever. Grandpa John reveals he first learned of full moon fever when he's busy exploring the woods of Canada last October, where he managed to get himself lost during a Halloween full moon. I'm surprised it wasn't in Eastern Europe, like our usual foreign werewolf escapades. Grandpa John ended up wandering into an old woman's log cabin, where she fed him some soup and gave him directions back to his campsite, and warned him about full moon fever, where if you look at the full moon on Halloween night at just the right time, you'll be cursed to become half man, half beast. The only way to fully recover from full moon fever is to look at the full moon the following month at just the right time, but people usually don't last that long. Grandpa John thanked her for her directions and was able to make his way back to his campsite, but not before accidentally gazing up at the Halloween moon. As I gazed up at it, a flash of silver moonlight made me blink. The strangest silver light washed over me. It felt so cold as ice. The silver light vanished and I suddenly felt dizzy. Rubbing my forehead with my gloved hand, I dropped to my knees. I felt sick. My stomach lurched. I began to sweat. My whole body shook. Chills made me shudder, but I felt so hot, so unbearably hot. And then my body started to change. My skin started to itch. Everything tingled and itched. My eyeballs itched. And then I could feel the fur, pushing up through my skin, thick, bristly fur, pushing up through my arms, my legs, my chest. I caught it, you see, Grandpa Joe said excitedly, leaning forward on the edge of his big armchair. You understand what happened, don't you? Last Halloween in the woods, I caught full moon fever. Alicia and I gaped at him in silence. His eyes were bulging, he was breathing rapidly. With a furious growl, Grandpa John leapt off the chair and dove at us. I caught full moon fever, he roared, and now I'm gonna give it to you. This is obviously a fake out because we established multiple times that old Grandpa John is a prankster. The kids spend a restless night before heading home the next day, but he makes sure to remind them before they leave that Halloween is in 2 weeks with a full moon, so they better be careful. The story moves right along, and we are at Halloween night as Robbie and Alicia are scrambling to throw together some last-minute Halloween costumes. Alicia dresses herself in all yellow and tapes a yellow funnel to her head, declaring she's a Teletubby because it's 1999, and Robbie just goes as Zorro. Scruffy interrupts this scene by latching onto Robbie's cape for a bit before the mom intervenes. Scruffy then eats a used tissue and spends some time making out with the mom. Scruffy is getting a lot of attention in this book, so he better not get eaten. The kids head out for some trick-or-treating, and note that it's a full moon. Robbie's like, uh-oh, full moon fever. Then both kids are startled by some sort of beast stumbling across the yard at them. But it's Halloween night, so this is clearly just a kid in a costume. It's actually Alicia's best friend Maggie, and the kids spend a bit bantering back and forth before focusing on candy like God intended. The kids then get into an argument over candy rankings, and Robbie thinks sour candy is the worst, which I couldn't disagree more with. Sour candy is the best, even if it likes to tear at my mouth. After a couple hours of gathering candy, the kids are ready to head home, but Robbie wants to stop at one last house, Miss Eakin's place, even though she despises kids, especially after Robbie accidentally kicked a soccer ball right through her front window. There are also rumors about her being some sort of a witch, so they don't want to provoke her further. Maggie takes off, so now it's just Robbie and Alicia. They venture over to this witch house and are met with a very cheerful Miss Eakins, who declares Halloween is her favorite holiday. She hands the kids 2 Best Bar chocolate bars each and wishes them a happy Halloween. While walking home, they sample these Best Bars and are shocked by how delicious these mystery candy bars are. This Miss Eakins is clearly up to some witchy shit with these chocolate bars. Robbie then remembers full moon fever and wants Alicia to stare at the moon with him, but she's not into this idea. Eventually, she decides to humor him, but probably shouldn't have because suddenly Robbie is overcome with full moon fever. And then my whole body shuddered violently as a powerful wave of white light, so cold, so freezing cold, washed over me. I felt a strong jolt, as if I'd been shocked by electricity, as if I'd been struck by lightning. The white light closed around me, so bright I couldn't see, I couldn't move. I heard Alicia scream. I opened my mouth to call back to her, but I couldn't make a sound. The light slowly began to fade. I realized I was sweating. Cold drops of sweat rolled down my face. My shirt clung wetly to my back. Darker. The houses, the street, the trees came back into view. My body trembled, my teeth chattered, sweat rolled down my face, prickled the back of my neck. Alicia, I managed to choke out her name, but then I felt so sick. My stomach tightened into a tiny hard ball as if somebody was squeezing me so hard I couldn't breathe. So sick, I murmured, dropping to my knees. I felt so weak, so sick. I started to collapse. The ground tilted and roared up to meet me. I felt the hard, cold pavement slap my forehead, and then everything went black. Robbie opens his eyes and is back in his bedroom, where he briefly thinks this was all just a terrifying dream, until he looks at his bed around him and sees it's been torn to shreds. He looks closer and you can see he's also covered in short black hairs, and his room has muddy clawed footprints all over it. He lurches over to the mirror and is startled when he stared wide-eyed at a monster. I still had my straight black hair, but beneath it, a snout. A long wolf snout with wet black nostrils. I opened my jaws and saw 2 jagged rows of yellow animal teeth. I raised my arms. Yes, I still had human arms and human hands, but the backs of my hands and arms were covered with thick, bristly black fur. Short black fur tufted over the back of my neck and down my back. My eyes. Only my eyes were the same. My eyes, my bright blue eyes. But everything else, monstrous and ugly. It becomes clear he caught full moon fever, and it occurs to him to check on Alicia to see if she has it too. It's kind of fun these werewolves aren't contained to the light of the full moon and are stumbling around in monster form in broad daylight. But at the same time, not to be a Debbie Downer, but Stein made it way too obvious this isn't full moon fever. Miss Eakins, the witch, obviously gave them some witchy chocolate. Alicia doesn't answer the door, but Robbie can tell she's caught full moon fever too, based on the animal sounds coming from the other side of the door. He tries to talk to her, but struggles to get words out since he sounds all beastie. Robbie breaks down the door and finds Alicia in werewolf form. She tackles him to the ground, and because she blames him for the current situation. The 2 wolf children spend some time throwing each other around the room before deciding to go for their parents for help. I'm not sure how these parents have managed to ignore the ruckus of 2 monster children trashing the bedroom, but they did. They find their mom washing dishes, and when she turns around, she rightfully freaks the fuck out. She starts shrieking monsters and proceeds to swing a broom at the kids. Robbie ends up snatching the broom out of her hands and snapping it over his knee, while Alicia trashes the kitchen table. Robbie realizes they can't control their anger and truly are half beast. He tries to explain things to his mother while she trembles in silence, but all that comes out are angry roars. Alicia, on the other hand, seems content trashing the place and is in the background smashing up the cabinets. His mom manages to reach the phone and dials 911. This sends Robbie into a full-on rage. He sees red and rips the phone out of the wall, while Alicia continues her path of destruction and begins to pull the fridge apart. Robbie is able to calm down enough to realize he doesn't want to hurt his mom and pulls Alicia into the backyard. He suddenly feels very hungry, and the 2 beast kids gallop across the neighborhood looking for something to eat, while his vision is literally some sort of hazy red. Some poor squirrel is out busy doing squirrel things when Robbie snatches it up, but before he can have a bite, Alicia snatches it out of his hands and plunges her teeth into the squirrel's little belly, ripping out a big old bite. Like we've established, tiny, cute, fuzzy creatures don't fare well in Series 2000. Scruffy needs to watch his back. After having a couple more squirrels as a snack, Robbie and Alicia calm down enough to practice their speech skills and are able to somewhat communicate with each other. They agreed they need to locate Grandpa John for help, since he's the only one who knows about full moon fever. Grandpa John is an hour away by car, so Alicia thinks they should try to get Maggie's brother Clay to drive them. I feel like an hour away in beast mode really isn't that far, but they seem to think this brother is totally going to be down for driving 2 wolf children around. When they reach Maggie's house, they're too late. She's already off to school. So they decide to just spend the day hiding in people's yards until they can chat with Maggie. They lurk around various yards, snacking on bugs and worms, until they decide to hide out in somebody's yard shed for cover. Robbie trips over a toy, which enrages him, and he proceeds to start trashing the backyard while he bellows how he's a monster. This catches the attention of some random man who wants to know what all that noise in his backyard is about. When he comes across our two werewolves, he springs into action and knocks Alicia unconscious with a rake. This sends Robbie into another rage, but these two monster kids are not very powerful because this man is able to pin Robbie to the wall with a flimsy-ass rake. Robbie is able to eventually snap the rake in half and tackles the man to the ground, where he then bites him on the arm. The guy's able to flee inside, and Robbie turns his attention to Alicia. I was kind of hoping Robbie would just eat this guy, just to see Goosebumps go to full-on murder. Alicia comes to, and they decide to try to hide closer to Maggie's house, because they're certain the man Robbie bit is inside calling the police. We spend some time with these two running around freaking people out and inadvertently causing car accidents. They hear the approach of some police sirens, and decide the only safe place to hide is in the sewer. While lurking in the sewers, Robbie's hit with another pang of hunger, and searches the waters for something to eat, but all he can find is a few tiny bugs. Alicia gets lucky and finds a floating dead worm and slurps it up as they're waiting. The story then jumps to 3:30 and Maggie's finally out of school. They crawl out of the sewer and wander over to Maggie's house. Alicia is certain Maggie will recognize her since she's her best friend, but it's like she forgot her own mother to even recognize her own children, so I don't have high hopes for this plan. When Maggie first sees Alicia, she shrieks and takes off running. Alicia tackles her to the ground and forces her to stare into her eyes, and eventually Maggie's able to recognize the eyes of her best friend. They're able to communicate that they need to reach their Grandpa John due to the full moon fever. Maggie agrees to ask her brother for help, but while she's heading upstairs to get him, Robbie notices a fish tank. He snatches up a goldfish and gobbles it up just in time for Maggie to see. This is what sends her over the edge, and she chases them out of her house. In response, Alicia angrily lobs a jack-o'-lantern at the door. Both kids then devour chunks of rotten pumpkin because they're just so hungry. They decide at this point they have no choice, they're just gonna have to walk to Grandpa John's house. If they had left like 8 hours ago, they'd probably already be there by now. The Beast Kids wait until dark and begin their journey. It really doesn't take them that long, because after 3 hours, they're nearly at Grandpa John's. But not before stopping to eat some roadkill. Robbie spots a flattened rabbit in the middle of the road and peels it up for him and Alicia to share. Stein is really enjoying having these two kids eat gross things in this book. That's like the only thing that happens. They also have to dodge a mysterious van that they think has spotted them, but eventually it drives off. This doesn't really go anywhere, even though it feels like it was supposed to. Once outside the cottage, it's almost dawn, and they pound on the door to wake up Grandpa John. It takes him a bit, but once again, after he gets a good look into their eyes, he's able to recognize his grandchildren. He at first thinks it's a Halloween costume, but they keep repeating full moon fever at him until he understands. He keeps insisting it was just a story, but the kids won't accept this as an answer. He reminds them that the old lady said the only way to cure full moon fever was to wait until the next full moon the following month. This really enrages the kids because they can't spend an entire month like this. They trash Grandpa John's house before pinning him to the ground. Robbie and Alicia then look at each other and realize they're about to eat Grandpa John. While I'm thinking, do it, do it. Robbie is able to stop himself, but has to pull Alicia away. They decide they're just gonna have to go visit this old woman in the woods if they want to find a chance at another cure. Things get even more ridiculous because I assumed they'd be driving to Canada, but nope. Grandpa John arranges for them to travel in cargo on an airplane. He also distracts the kids with frozen meat while he sets all this up. The next morning, he stuffs his monster grandchildren into some shipping crates, and within a page, they're loaded onto a plane. While flying to Canada, Robbie can hear the sounds of other dogs in nearby crates and fantasizes about breaking free and eating a few of them. Luckily, Alicia knows what he's thinking and tells him to stay put because that will only get them caught. We then jump to the Canadian forest with our trio trying to locate this old woman's cabin. It's nearly dark and Grandpa John is hopelessly lost. Well, at least for a couple pages he is, because soon they're outside this old lady's cabin. Alicia beats on the door and the old lady comes out with a rifle, threatening to shoot. Grandpa John begs her for help, but she's like, that was just a story. Full moon fever isn't real. This answer is again not well received, as she suggests they try crazy old Dr. Thorne, who's lived in these woods for 70 years. This book is really starting to feel like it was written on the fly. It's really a whole lot of just running from scene to scene when I think about it more closely, because now they're off to see Dr. Thorne, who lives even deeper in these woods. For real, we've ran out of their house, ran around backyards, ran to Maggie's house, ran to school, ran up some more backyards, ran into a shed, ran into a sewer, ran back to Maggie's house, ran to Grandpa Joe's, flew to Canada, ran to an old lady's cabin, and now we're running on to the next spot. It's a very thin plot, but I'm having an okay time. It takes them 2 hours to reach this Dr. Thorne, and they notice this cabin is surrounded by nets, complete with a boat just sitting in the middle of the woods. They are met by Dr. Thorne Jr., who doesn't seem all that shocked to see two wolf children. Robbie asks about the boat since there's no water nearby, and Junior informs them that one day these woods will flood, and it'll become a raging river. I'd be like, oh shit, these are some sort of religious fundamentalists, but they kinda just move past this. Junior then grabs Robbie by the neck and is surprised to see the fur is real. He then asks if Robbie is part gorilla. The trio again asks to see the father and are finally led into this cabin. My secret theory that this was another free writing exercise book, like Legend of the Lost Legend, becomes stronger because once inside the cabin, Junior pulls off a wig, the fake chins he was wearing, and declares he is Dr. Thorne. He's always wanted a son, but never had one, so he had to create him. Why is this in the middle of our werewolf story? I swear, Stein is the biggest troll sometimes with these books. Grandpa John tries to get us back on topic and is just like, okay, well, anyways, can you help my grandchildren? Both Robbie and Alicia are losing their patience, and it's becoming increasingly tempting to eat this crazy old man for wasting their time. Dr. Thorne spends a bit consulting a bunch of old books, and finally declares he has no idea how to help them, and can't even find full moon fever mentioned anywhere. He then pulls a rope behind his desk like a supervillain, and suddenly Robbie, Alicia, and Grandpa John are all trapped under a net, and he says he's gonna make them famous. The next chapter then opens 3 weeks later, and Robbie's exhausted from being on constant tour. Dr. Thorne has been parading the wolf kids around in a cage in a traveling carnival, while Grandpa John lives handcuffed in a trailer. Robbie and Alicia are miserable, and they try their best to escape. At one point, Robbie was almost able to tear a man's arm off who got too close to his cage, but now they keep the audience at a safe distance. At night, Dr. Thorne feeds them raw meat, they go to sleep, and then they start the day all over again. Robbie has a plan though, because he knows the next full moon is getting closer. The night of the full moon, Robbie and Alicia plan to play dead, so Dr. Thorne has to investigate further. Then, they'll knock him out and stand outside under the full moon so they can get cured. Dr. Thorne doesn't come though, and they think it's because he doesn't want to risk anything on a full moon night. This fills the Beast Kids with rage, and they end up just breaking out of the cages using pure strength. Once outside, they are met with Dr. Thorne, who is armed with a whip. He attempts to whip them back into their cages like a lion tamer, but they overpower him and lock him in the cage instead, even though, once again, it would have been way better if they actually ate him. The kids then run into the moonlight to see if it cures them, but this doesn't work because it was the magic chocolate bars on Halloween night from the witch, not the full moon fever. But the kids still don't know this because they're not well versed in Goosebumps books. We then have a few pages as the kids free Grandpa John, fly back to America in cargo containers, and then return to their house. Their parents aren't home, and the Beast children are greeted happily by Scruffy. Robbie has to fight the urge to eat Scruffy and remembers his sack of Halloween candy. He starts wolfing it down with Alicia when they come across the best bars from Halloween night and see that they're actually beast bars and realize they've been the victims of witchcraft. They storm over to Mrs. Eakin's house, and when she doesn't answer the door, they break in and start trashing the place. Miss Eakins finally appears and is like, "Did you have a nice Halloween, my little beasties?" Which sends Alicia into attack mode. She tackles the witch to the floor and starts to strangle her. Robbie heads on over to help finish off the old witch when he accidentally bumps into a cabinet, revealing a bunch of candy bars. He picks one up and reads, "Cure Bar," and is like, "Aha, we're free." They start to gobble down the candy bars and march out the door. Miss Eakins then shouts smaller and smaller at them as they're leaving. As they're walking away, Robbie starts to feel strange and notices his clothes and shoes feel very loose and he's suddenly shrinking. It's not clear if they're still beasts or not at this point because Stein doesn't give a shit. Also, were these children running around in human clothes this whole time? I thought they were just full-on monsters. Wouldn't their mom have noticed the familiar clothes right away then? Whatever, it doesn't matter now. Alicia grabs one of the candy bars from Robbie and is like, "Oh shit, you did it again. These aren't cure bars, they're curse bars." So, that's how this one ends, with these two kids being shrunken down by magic candy bars. While they still may or may not be beasts, these kids paid quite the price for kicking a soccer ball through a window on accident like 3 months ago. Overall, I thought Full Moon Fever was just okay, and it was clear Stein was running a little thin on what to do in this story. I enjoyed that they weren't traditional werewolves and stayed in beast form throughout the story, but this book was really hindered by how obvious the twist was. It just made a lot of the story feel knowingly pointless as a result, and it kind of made it drag for me. It was also guilty of just inserting nonsense scenes because Stein didn't know what else to do, like when Dr. Thorne Jr. took off a disguise to show he was actually Dr. Thorne. I'm going to give this one 3 out of 5 best bars. If this book had caught me in a bad mood, it could have easily been a 2-star book. As far as the vomit count goes, I don't recall any vomiting scenes in this one because these little beast children were enjoying all the gross shit they ate. This leaves the Series 2000 total at 15. Well, that's it for Full Moon Fever. I found this one a little disappointing and felt like if it had more time to cook, it could have been a stronger story. Next week is Slappy's Nightmare, and I had kind of forgot we had more Slappy to look forward to in Series 2000. I should just be thankful there's no more monster blood in this series. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Full Moon Fever. Did you think the chocolate twist was obvious? What was up with Dr. Thorne? Is Miss Eakins the pettiest witch we've met so far? Also, what did you think of all my werewolf horror clips? It was really hard for me not to call Miss Eakins Ekins and Grandpa John Grandpa Joe throughout this entire video. Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching and make sure you subscribe for
the pride, the love,